Thank you so much. Had to make sure that I didn't hit the leave the meeting button instead, right? Okay, so we're recording and we're here together in this space, and it is my pleasure. I'm going to start us off. I have two esteemed colleagues. They will introduce themselves in more detail in their portions, but Keith Walters and Keith's at Cal Baptist, and he and I have done some research and some publishing together about video. And then Alan Hollis is a colleague at Riverside County Office of Ed, and we have done teacher induction work. He's now doing special education intern work, and he'll tell you more about how that work intersects with us here today. But at that, I think, James, you're going to go ahead and share the slides, and we will get up and rolling. So when we think about video, and I'm going to, my perspective, I'll share my perspective and my experience here in a minute. We really want to think about video for reflection. And I know most folks, and I see a lot of friends and colleagues in the space, I know we're thinking about the performance assessments and we're thinking about the use of video, but we're really going to take this and focus on video-based reflection. And then we'll also add in some of those best practices for the performance assessments. So with that, on my next slide, I'm going to go ahead and just let you know where I'm coming from and what my work is. So I work in Riverside and San Bernardino County Offices of Ed. And in that work, I have induction programs. I have an admin preparation that I'm an instructor for. And then we also have the clear admin. And then my work right now has been at University of Redlands adjunct. And that course that I'm teaching there is coaching for teacher growth. So I think you'll see how that connects in here in a minute. Also, I am working as the Cal APA Cycle 3 lead. I have two colleagues in that work, Kathy Condren and Marco Nava from LAUSD. And then lastly, my research. And this is really what brings me to this work. And if we'll go to that next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about where that comes from. So in our induction program, which used to be, in the old days, it was RIMSBITSA, we're now the Center for Teacher Innovation. We looked at the program standards and thought long and hard about how do we get coaches to think about their practice, and how do we have coaches engage in reflection. And so for over 10 years, we have used video for coach reflection. So that's where I'm coming from in my practice. Some of that connects to some different theory I'm going to go into on my next slide in a moment, but I really want to make that perspective clear that for me, that this is more than just being about performance assessment, that this is about developing scholarly reflective practitioners. And so when I approach video and reflection and annotation and rationale, I'm thinking about developing those practices even more so than worrying about the performance assessment itself. So, okay, so with that, let's go ahead. I won't bore you with all the conceptual and theoretical framework, but they are important. And these are the underpinnings of what happens when we engage in that video-based reflection. So we've got some, Shun is really the main researcher on reflective practice. We have Mesro for transformative learning, Bandura for social learning, Wenger, if you will, for communities of practice. All of these elements and these theories are or do form our conceptual framework of how we approach this video use. So on the next slide, it's got a lot on there, and I'm gonna use this slide as the gestalt, and then when we go to the next version, we'll drill a little deeper here. But what I wanted to point out is how this experience, and again, video-based reflection, how the experience is bracketed. And so if we look at the sides, so this is a graphic that I use to describe the experience as I was learning more about the research and conducting my own research. It's bracketed in this notion that these arrows are going both directions. So we're going clockwise, we're going and engaging with others. We're using the term here, mentors. Really, I'm using the term educative mentors. Somewhat similar to the term coach. I won't get into all of that here with this group, but that would need some unpacking as we think about that. But what we see here in this, the oval, we see that video, as I said, as an instructional tool. And then we also see the notions of feedback. We see the notion of challenge, and we see the notion of support. So the video itself is just one part of that, that compendium of understanding. So the video certainly allows us, and let's go ahead to that next slide, if you would for me, James. Thank you. So now I'm going to move my gallery. Sorry, folks. Let me slow down here for a second. So what's going on when we're using that video as instructional tool? We are providing, that video is providing that empirical evidence, and in this case of the interactions. So the evidence of the interactions, the conversations, which either the candidate and their coach, or we could also say that for the Cal APA, we could say that the candidate, the admin candidate, and their volunteer teacher. So we've got evidence of those interactions. And it's so important that that evidence allows for repeated, and I'm going to bring this theme up a couple times, but it allows for that repeated and strategic observation. So both of those things are important. And then if we move to the green arrow in the upper right-hand part of the slide, we see that reflection. So what is reflection? We say this is providing reflection. Well, what is that? It's levels of consciousness and cognition. And it's that cognition which is going to impact learning, and it's going to impact practice. So it's not quite a fulcrum. It doesn't depict here as a fulcrum, but it really is that consciousness and cognition that's going to move a candidate forward. Okay, so there's a lot there. We're being recorded. You can go back ahead and look at this again, but that's really that understanding of video as instructional tool. All right, so let's go ahead, and now my job is to make a connection here to that theory and what it is that we're doing in our performance assessments. Okay, so what does this what does this mean? What's the connection here? The compendium of research indicates that practice is changed when we notice and name our practice. So let me slow down there for a second. So we've got all these things going on. I can watch this video, I can talk to my mentor, or for the APA, the volunteer teacher can talk to their candidate. But the changes occur when we can notice our actions and we can name our actions or our practice. So that's really crucial for the way that we use video, again, not just for performance assessment, but even in our iterative experiences that we want our candidates. So let's just kind of hold on to that notion. Okay, so holding on to the notion that noticing and naming is crucial. Okay, so as I hold on to that, then I'm going to shift, and now I'm going to specifically talk about performance assessments, and in this case, the Cal APA. So in this slide, I'm suggesting, and this is what I do with my candidates, that it can be very impactful if I ask my candidates to identify what's going on and why without them trying to really do anything with the annotation titles or crafting a rationale. So what I wrote on here, before candidates affix a label, have them talk through what was going on in their head, not what's going on in the video. So what we see, and I will show you some anti-examples and some examples. What we see often is candidates describing, when they're uploading into ePen, into the system, they're describing what's taking place in the video. And that's not what's going to move them forward in their practice. We want them to be able to notice and name and provide a rationale. So yeah, Kelly, I saw it. Yeah, so let me make sure I read Kelly's comment correctly. So Kelly, let's hold on to that for a second. So yes, but let's come back to that, okay? Because I don't want to do disservice to your comment there. So have them talk through, have them watch their video, have them watch each other's video, and have them talk through before trying to put any labels or any rationale, right? Have them really think about what is going on and why they made the coaching move that they did. Or if they missed an opportunity to ask an important question, how, you know, I noticed when I watched this video now, I realized I did this. Okay, rationale, evidence of what we want is we want them to have evidence of their practice. Okay, let's go ahead on to that, the next slide. Thank you so much. Okay, so in this portion, I wanted to take us more in detail to the essential questions. So again, on the previous slide, I suggested what could be impactful is, I said, before they affix a label, have them talk it through. I would also suggest that our practice includes reading the essential questions before we ever get to, and I'm even going to say, even before we get to the templates or into creating the videos themselves. There's a lot of text on this screen. I'm not going to read you those, but what I did choose is I chose the 3 rubrics that I'll say most largely or most directly connect with the Cal APA Cycle 3 to the videos. Okay, so what I like to have my candidates do is read those essential questions and then restate it back to their partner, to themselves. And then for my Cal APA folks in the room, I don't know if you engage or have your candidates engage in reading the CSTP continuum. But what I like to have my candidates do is I like to have them read an element or two in the CSTP, and then I like to have them describe or define what they would see and what they would hear if that element were in evidence in a classroom, so that they can be very clear about what they can capture, so they can imagine what evidence. So the notion here is very similar to me, to my thinking anyway. I want my candidates to understand these essential questions, and I want them to be able to conceptualize, to envision, if you will, what does it look like when this is in practice? Then it should be an easier shift for them to then say, okay, now I know what I need to do. Now I know what polished practice looks like. From this exercise, then we go into, okay, now let's look at the rubrics. Now let's look at each construct of level 3, in this case for 3.2, 3.4, and 3.5. And what is it that I have to hit? What are the markers I'm going to hit? Alan's going to do a great job in when he talks about the ed specialist, and he's going to give you a lot of great pointers about thinking about like the video planning and such. And I can't do it justice right now. So and I don't want to step on his content, but he's going to give you some really key ideas about what to think about. So nonetheless, going back 2 steps, make it clear about why they're doing this, make it clear what the essential questions are, connect it to them being your candidates, to unpacking what they're going to include. And then it just makes that planning and the follow through, I'll say, more meaningful. It's not just a performance assessment. It's them understanding what those best practices are. All right, so that's at the heart of how I approach this. And then we're going to go on to the next slide, just as a reminder. And again, I know we're not all Cal AP. I know we're just, lots of folks with lots of different perspective, if you will. So I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things for cycle 3. So in the Cal APA cycle 3, we have required annotation titles. And now what I really want to shift the focus on is to the rationale. And I do use this term, polished evidence of practice. So when I'm talking to candidates, whether it's teacher candidates or admin candidates, I ask them to consider the power of the rough draft. That's in video and in writing. And I ask them to think about what they want to polish after they receive feedback from their peers. And then they determined when they have a polished piece of evidence, and that's what they want to submit. All right, so when we go on to the next slide, just a little further reminder. I didn't want, for those of you who aren't as familiar, I wanted to make sure that you knew all these required annotation titles. So here are the annotation titles. Hopefully I don't have any typos. I did check that I had the correct number. So step 2, there are the 4 required. And then for step 3, there are the 5 required. And then let's go ahead, and you're going to do a little practice here. So I have on this slide an actual borrowed with permission, somebody's first take, stab, if you will, of their annotation rationale. So what you see here is this candidate, this APA candidate just wrote, the teacher incorporated Spanish in the lesson, which provided support for English language learners. So that's important. The student led the class in explaining her thinking of solving the warm-up problem. If we were to go into the rubric though, this candidate has this draft of their rationale doesn't really include what is it that is missing here? And it's really the rationale. Okay, this is a description of what took place. So let's go ahead to the next slide and let's look at, first of all, first noticing is that this candidate certainly has more text as part of their rationale. Okay, but I've highlighted 2 particularly interesting points. And again, this is not as an assessor, this is as thinking of someone who's using video. What did I say that we need to do? I said we need to notice and we need to name. And if we can notice and we can name, then we can change and improve our practice. So in 2 cases here, 2 instances, this particular candidate is unpacking their thinking. And I'll let you read that. And what we also have evidence, excuse me, in the last sentence, if you will, we really see an analysis, even though the candidate did not use the term, this is my analysis of this occurrence. What we do have is some evidence that the candidate is understanding the resultant, when they say teacher, they're talking about their volunteer teacher, they're able to articulate the resultant impact on their volunteer teacher. So this admin candidate has seen the power of their actions and then what's going to happen next. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look on the next slide. Let's go one more, James, and then let's come back to this if you would, please. So I would contend that even though this is the same rationale, that even though this had evidence of analysis, this included the rationale, included what they were thinking, that maybe this could even have been stronger. So take a look with that lens. How could this response have been even stronger? And let's go ahead and let's use the chat for that. What else? So if this were your writing, you were reflecting on your practice, what else could have made this response even stronger? Okay, some good thinking. Hey, Melody. So Melody says how the situation was impactful to instructional development. Excellent. Thanks, Melody. They could have made a connection to a theory, right? They could have brought forth what they were going to do, what they might think of next. Oh, Lori, excellent. Agreed upon CSTP. Thank you. Here we go. Vendetta. Yes. So in this case, actually, this candidate that I'm referring to, I think was working with someone who would have made a connection to the CSTPs, but CSTPs and the TPEs being very much connected, Vendetta, you're absolutely right. And I agree with you, citing the research base. Even if they, talked about adult learning theory, right? That adults need to be involved in the planning and the evaluation of their instruction, or the fact that, again, adults are interested in learning that has immediate relevance. So she could have added, or they could have added in something of that notion, which would have further strengthened their connection to theory. So excellent. Okay, well, thank you all for putting those ideas in the chat. Hey, Kitty, good to see you. And Kitty, you said provide examples of what they might be talking about. And I think maybe you mean more information. If maybe you could follow up on that for me, Kitty.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. More information, okay. More details. I'm sorry. I was typing and I went to the wrong place. So yeah, more details about when they said, I asked about areas of growth to make connections to strengths we identified in the current lesson. Then talk about what those were. What were those areas? What came out of that?
Thank you. Right, exactly. Remember, for those of you who are engaged and with the Cal APA, they had a pre-observation conference. They learned about the students in this person's classroom. So that would have been another piece that they could have articulated. So, all right, well, thank you for that. Maybe you have some ideas percolating and you didn't put them in the chat. I hope those keep percolating. James, could you go back to the previous slide for me? I think this is just really important, and then we're going to hand it over, I think, to Keith here. I have one other discussion point, but this is a slide I've used in my courses, and a reminder to my candidates, again, teacher candidates or admin candidates. The annotation rationale in these performance assessments are not throwaways. This is a lot of evidence that's included in there. So it's really important. And I do think having them talk it through before they go ahead and write and try and put an annotation, I think that's been really beneficial. So with that, let's go jump 2 slides, discussion point. There we go. Oops. There we go. I'll leave you with this, not for us so much to engage, but for you to think about, because this does need to be an iterative process, just think about, do you have in your programs, the people that you work with, what opportunities do you have to provide those iterative practice opportunities? So with that, I wrap up. I say thank you so much. My colleagues have a lot of good details and other ideas to share with you. So thank you so much. Good to be together.
Well, I guess I should have unmuted a little bit quicker. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am not at the Riverside County of Education. I am a university professor, and I want to just provide a little bit of background. I was a new professor in the state of California in 2002. And being the new person on the block, the first task that they gave me is to launch CalTPA version 1 for our program, because nobody else wanted to handle this mess. And at that particular point in time, we had a crazy thing called voluntary implementation. But anyways, the whole point that I wanted to make here is that being in charge of the CalTPA, teaching in a small program where I taught all of the methods courses and also supervised student teaching was incredibly insightful, because I knew what they learned in their methods courses. And I knew that that they had these best practices that they were mastering. And then they would get into student teaching, and as they worked with their master teachers, everything that I taught them in the curriculum class seemed to disappear, because now they were trying to do what the master teacher wanted. And then we would go to the CalTPA, and we would have yet another version of what they thought was right. And one of the things that began to emerge as I reflected on this is that there is a distinct difference between teaching to a passing score versus teaching to a test. And there's a lot of very subtle things that we can do that give people the impression that passing this test, passing this assessment is all that matters. And the truth is that if we don't address those implicit messages, this whole activity is not going to change practices. So I want to dig into this a little bit as we look at what are some of the ways that we can provide effective practice to our candidates. So next slide. So in 2020, I think it was, when COVID hit, and we were all forced to go into online learning. This idea of video mentoring during fieldwork opportunities became very important. And there were several universities that were looking at doing video mentoring pre-COVID, and there were a lot of institutions that were forced to go to video mentoring during COVID. Now, a group of us got together and we began to say, you know what, video mentoring has the potential of being powerful. Now, we went beyond the marketing of the companies that offer the platforms, because the companies that offer the platforms would say, look at how many comments are being made. As our group, we began to say, no, you know what? If we use video mentoring properly, this third point of reference could become the impetus for professional inquiry. And because we supervisors are spending less time on the road and less time waiting for a class to start, they can once again provide more mentoring or coaching support during this endeavor. So our group began to say, you know what, video mentoring has the power of really nurturing what new teachers understand and create the foundation of inquiry that will propel them throughout their career. So we began to create a survey that would give us insights into what actually was happening. Our survey was built on two theoretical considerations. The first consideration was, what do adults need in a learning environment? And we looked at this idea of coaching to build professional agency. Now, we've been using the word coaching and mentoring somewhat interchangeably throughout this presentation. We could do a whole hour and a half just on the distinctions of these words, but I want to be just very simplistic here. Coaching is when you have an expert with experience helping a novice who doesn't have experience. So I just want to use that very simple definition. Now, the other thing that adults need is the opportunity to make mistakes, reflect on mistakes, and redo things based on their new understandings. In other words, Dweck's work of growth mindset. And then the third thing that adults really need is the freedom to engage in inquiry in the areas in which they are interested in. And then the second thing we began to look at is lesson study protocols. How do we actually help somebody look at a lesson that they taught or a learning segment that they taught and, dissect it and really begin to, think about what worked, what didn't work, what would be alternatives. So based on these two theories, we created a survey that we sent out to 10 different universities, and we had supervisors and student teaching candidates from these 10 universities complete the survey. I think our N was somewhere around 300. And I want to briefly share some of the more interesting results. Now, the first thing that began to emerge here is that the mentors or the coaches were more optimistic about the effectiveness of video mentoring than were the student teachers. And the mentors or coaches thought that that did see how the video could help them evaluate the teaching of the student teacher that they were working with. And the mentor or coach believed that by communicating via writing and in certain instances through a brief Zoom meeting, that they could still build professional relationships. Now, what's interesting is that the student teachers were not as optimistic about that. The student teachers begin to say, no, I don't think you're really getting the full gestalt of my teaching when you watch this video. And no, I don't really feel like you are fully hearing me and relating to me during these meetings. So there is a difference there in interpretation. Next one. The second thing that began to emerge here is that the mentors were a little more optimistic about the candidate's ability to leverage video mentoring as a means of identifying personal strengths and personal struggles. Once again, the mentors are coming with their expertise and they're saying, oh, you know what, when they watch themselves teach, they're going to be able to identify these things. But the candidates are saying, no, I'm not really seeing this. So we're beginning to see that mentors and student teachers are having different perspectives. Third, next slide, please. Now, both the mentors and the candidates tended to be less optimistic about the effectiveness of using video mentoring to uncover the impact that the candidates' teaching had on TK-12 student learning behaviors. So notice how we're beginning to get this differentiation emerging in regards to part of evaluation being the performance and part of the evaluation being what the students are learning. And so you're beginning to see that this idea of performance with video is viewed more positively than what actual impact did the performance have. Next slide, please. And both mentors and candidates tended to view it as less effective than in person. So, as we begin to look at this, they're beginning the silo effect of performance, the silo effect of student learning, the distance in regards to interactions made everybody feel less comfortable. So next slide. Now, one of the things that we began to ask is, why might this be happening? So, there was, I think, 2 programs out of the 10 that were using video mentoring before COVID. There were 8 programs that started to use video mentoring during COVID. And we took a step back and we said, what might we actually discover about the expectations that a university has for their supervisors? So we did a document study of the handbooks that were provided to the supervisors, both at the site, the university, and the candidate. And it was rather interesting when we did this document survey, because the focus was on meeting the TPE standards. And there was very little conversation about what actual outcomes did we want from candidates beyond just their ability to meet the standards. So evaluation details such as rubrics or feedback philosophy or coaching philosophy, none of that was really articulated within the handbooks. So we began to unpack this and we began to think about what might this mean. Next slide, please. And we realize at this point that, more research is needed. Is there a difference between universities that are using this pre-COVID and are committed to it versus the ones who are using it just for COVID? Is there a difference between tech-savvy supervisors and tech-savvy candidates? What do people actually think? So we know that we need to do more research. However, we thought that taking this idea of differentiating performance, student learning, and relationships, that sense that these seem to be three different silos, we begin to say, what does current theory say that might give us insights into this appearance of these three silos? Next slide, please. So as we began to look at this, we began to say, coaching or mentoring is a very complex endeavor. And as we look at the role of a coach, we begin to realize that there's different spectrums that a coach is operating under. The first spectrum might go from, am I a colleague with my student teacher? Are we equals? All the way to, I'm the teacher of my student teacher, and it's my job to tell them what to do. So there's that spectrum that goes from colleague to teacher. There's also this spectrum that goes from assessor. My job is to evaluate how effective you are, to an encourager. I'm your friend, I'm your confidant, I'm your mentor. So as we looked at these different spectrums that are impacting a supervisor during a coaching experience, we realized that a grid matrix is really a good way of operationalizing what's going on. And as we unpack the grid matrix, we can begin to say a coach has four roles. One, they are the expert. They are there to assess how the current developmental state of the candidate. They are there to share their expertise with the candidate. And that really tends to be the focus of what the documents are saying is occurring within most student teaching, new teacher programs. But there's three other aspects of mentoring that are very important. One is being a planner with the candidate. One is being a nurturer of the candidate, and one is being a facilitator of the candidate. So our next question is, what does theory say should be happening in the planning, nurturing, and facilitator realms? So the first thing we looked at is this idea of co-planning. And we dug a little bit deeper into this idea of what does it mean to engage in a lesson study. And one element of a lesson study is there are post-observation conversations. And these clearly are happening right now in almost all student teaching experiences. There's leveraging sophisticated lesson templates. And as you look at these handbooks, you can see the intentional efforts that universities are making to coordinate their template with the TPA to make sure that every element is covered. And then there's also this idea of what do I need to do? What will help me pass the TPA? So these three elements of lesson study are really clearly there. But there's certain elements that really are missing. And one that is missing is an emphasis on all parts of the feedback cycle. So, for example, one aspect of the feedback cycle is collective planning prior to a teaching observation. Now, this becomes very difficult because if I'm in a third grade classroom, I don't often have the opportunity to plan a lesson, watch my mentor teacher teach it, watch the teacher down the hall teach it myself, and talk to each other. So as we begin to look at all parts of the feedback cycle, we need to begin to make some alterations. So for example, we may focus on something such as an instructional strategy, such as pair share. And so, as you think about the idea of pair share, there's certain things that teachers can do that make pair share work better. And there's certain things that teachers will forget to do that make pair share worse. So, is there conversations where people are sitting down and saying, okay, tomorrow we're going to use pair share. Here's how we're going to implement it. And then after they do the activity, do they sit down and say, what happened to the pair share? What kind of outcome did it produce? How might we modify how we use pair share tomorrow? And so notice how it's this feedback cycle where we look at something, we plan something, we implement something, we gather data. And it's that consistent cycle of doing something over and over again to really begin to dig deeply about what's going on. That feedback cycle of repeated practice is something that we don't see in any of the handbooks for student teaching supervision. And embedded into this idea of the lesson study is this idea then of inquiry. Why are we using pair share instead of think pair share? Why are we using think pair share instead of think write pair share? So it's really this push of saying, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what's happening? So next slide, please. So then we look at this idea of nurturing agency. And one of the things we notice once again is that that in most coaching situations, there is a safe space to discuss obstacles. And there's also general reflections on instructional advice based on observations. So there's this sense here of, okay, let's talk about this. But as we look, for example, at Korthagen's work in the area of core value reflection, we begin to see that reflection can really be pushed to a deeper level. And Korthagen talks about this idea of an elevator. What do you think is going on? How does that make you feel? And what do you wish would happen? And this begins to move into what Melissa was talking about. And one of the people in the chat noted something that I'm going to emphasize here as well. And it's this idea that a colleague of ours calls this being on reality TV, where we're looking at a clip and we're beginning to say, what's going on in my mind when this is happening? And sometimes when we're looking at this, it's not just for the sense of, is this the perfect pedagogy for that moment? Sometimes it's what's going on in your heart? What's going on in your soul? Are you confident? Are you blossoming as an instructor, or are you beginning to feel intimidated? And part of what we don't do often is to validate the funds of knowledge that a new teacher brings into the environment. And many new teachers never experienced what it's like to struggle as a student. And we need to actually allow them space to say things like, I think students are lazy. I think students are unmotivated. Because if they have the freedom to say these things, then we can help them use the think, feel, wish elevator to help them begin to realize how that's inconsistent with their vision. So as we nurture agency, we actually are thinking more and more about the social emotional health of the candidate and the impact that it's having on the decisions that they're making. And then the third and last thing that we looked at is facilitating growth. And what we noticed here is that site and university expectations are clearly driving what's going on. Supervisors are clearly using their expertise to guide candidate growth, and supervisors are clearly trying to establish supporting relationships. But what we're not seeing a lot of is this sense of really allowing the candidate to ask these questions that are nagging in their soul that they're scared to ask because they don't want to appear unkind. They don't want to appear insensitive. They don't want to appear incompetent. The other thing that we tend to see is that we're still in a society that loves heuristics. Here are the 5 steps to use to make everything perfect. If something's going wrong, you must be messing up on these 5 steps. instead of trying to understand the complexity and ambiguity of reality and the power of action research in trying to understand where the heuristic is accurate and where the heuristic is inaccurate. So as we look at these elements, what begins to emerge here is that we may need to become more intentional in really trying to think about this feedback cycle that we have with the candidates we're working with, and giving them more practice of using video as a means of metacognition. So that brings us to the end. And I talked really fast and I apologize. And some of you are probably already doing these great things. And if you are, please share them in the chat so that others can benefit from them. But the essence of what I'm sharing here is we do a really good job of identifying the skills of teaching, but we cannot forget about the will, the motivation to do well, and the thrill, this is priceless aspect of teaching. And I think we need to try to work on making these three gears equal size. Thank you.
All righty, I guess I am up. Thank you so much. Certainly some great stuff there. My name is Alan Hollis. I'm with the Riverside County Office of Education. I'm the administrator over our Ed Specialist intern programs. And I've also been serving on the Ed Specialist Cal TPA design team and working as a Cycle 1 marker assessor. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to use video, kind of the nuts and bolts. We've heard some great stuff around the theory, what teachers and candidates and coaches and mentors are really looking for in reflecting on their practice. I'm going to kind of take it a step back even further and talk about just how to best record it, right? We have so many gadgets and gizmos, so many things going on in the classroom. I'm going to take a look at some of the tools to make sure we're capturing what we intend to, whether it's for a performance assessment or just to reflect on our practice in the classroom. So this quip hasn't aged too well during the pandemic, but I've used it for years with my candidates in special education. Teachers really only have to do one thing, and that's everything. And we know that that can be really tough to capture in recording. And one of the dichotomy of filming in the classroom these days is it has gotten so much easier with a cell phone, with our laptop cameras. I remember having to get the big shoulder mounted, VCR tape recorders way back when I was doing all this, first doing all this. So in some ways it is a whole lot easier. But oftentimes the stationary and limited tools, they can't really capture all of the nuanced and many varied activities that are going on in a modern classroom. We know teachers don't stand still, students don't stand still. So if your cell phone is standing still trying to record all this stuff, that can be an issue. It might not capture everything that we want to see. So to go back to the theory that we heard Melissa and Keith talking about, and trying to kind of look forward to all of this work going into the special ed TPAs. I spent a lot of time looking for the research around video reflection and video mentoring specific for the special education classrooms and teachers in special education. And there isn't a whole lot of research or magic bullets for those particular teachers or those particular classrooms. So the good news is the research does confirm the efficacy around all of this overall research translating to teachers in special education and students in special education. And that would all make sense, right? Because we know that the good work is going to carry over. But in terms of something we could really point to as this really works better or different or can be a focus, using video in the special ed world, there's still some research and maybe some gaps we need to explore there. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is just the good stuff we've seen in the challenges of filming in the classroom, whether it's in the gen ed side, on the APA side, and certainly we can start to think about it more for the education specialist Cal TPA. So when we think about some of these modern challenges, there can be a lot of adults in the classroom these days. We know that can particularly be true with some classrooms with students in special education. And so trying to film all of the supports going on from all the multiple adults, and let's be honest, not all of the adults want to be filmed and be part of these recordings. So that can produce some additional challenges for candidates trying to film, some of these videos potentially without some of their key para-educators. We also know that the action in the classroom really isn't focused in one place too often. There can be multiple centers, multiple rotations, the teacher's moving around, the students are moving around. So it can be tough to capture everything going on, at one time. And also the amount of differentiation that we want our teachers and candidates to be doing, that can be extremely nuanced and very hard to see on film. So I'm thinking about things like personal visual schedules, some of the assistive technology devices. Unless you're really kind of at the student desk level and looking over someone's shoulder, it could really be hard to see on film what's actually going on in the moment. So I wanted to talk about what seems to help with some of these things is kind of a film plan. And I wanted to, be cute and bring in some of our special education jargon here. So thinking about an intentional evidence plan as our IEP, or our intentional filming success plan for our IFSP, it's really important. And this could look different, obviously, for every classroom and every lesson, even different video clips and segments that we're going to record. But I'm going to admit, I know teachers aren't supposed to admit this. When I was a middle school English teacher, you don't want to grade differently for the neat handwriting, right? The kids who turn in that neat handwriting assignment. And I know that these assessors aren't going to score differently for, more slickly or professionally filmed video clips. But at the same token, why not make it easier for the assessors or the candidates themselves to find the evidence that they're looking for by really capturing and having a plan on what this recording and filming is going to look like. So, this could look different. If you just want to kind of look at your overall practice, that could be the always on stationary camera, just your cell phone is out, you're recording always, and you could kind of go back and, scroll through and see trends or even look for specific parts in your lesson. But with something like TPA video clips, where you really have a concrete plan of what you need to show and are going to show, and wanting to showcase specific moments in that lesson plan and different actions in the classroom, I think it really behooves everyone to have a plan going in. So, the research and common sense, I think, would confirm here that having someone else film the lesson and know the lesson can really help you capture everything going on. So I know that these performance assessments really hope to capture what actually happens in the classroom all the time. So if you need to set up your camera, your stationary camera, to record what's going on, I've seen teachers moving students, moving furniture, moving technology, just to get that clear line of sight, to film for the next 15 minutes. And we know that's not showing what might actually be happening in the classroom day to day. Obviously, sometimes that can be necessary, but it might not be ideal. So if you do have someone who knows the classroom, maybe it's one of the para-educators, maybe it's another teacher, maybe it's someone else trustworthy you could bring onto campus. If that person knows your classroom, knows that lesson plan, knows what's going to happen when, knows a little bit about your students who might need a break or who has that visual schedule you can kind of zoom in on them using at the desk. Those are all components of the classroom that, a tripod might not be able to capture. So, I know we don't want teachers to kind of sit or stand in one place throughout an entire lesson. We want them interacting with students. So, the same thing. So maybe the filming needs to kind of follow that flow. The one caveat, of course, is, that might not be great for all of our classrooms and all of our students, because having a stranger in there or added movement or stimuli, that might not be a good idea and might backfire on occasion. But again, that would be the teacher really demonstrating knowledge of the students and their situation going into the filming. But if it can happen, having that cameraman really is great. All righty, so when we think about the Cal TPA Ed Specialists video clips and what they require, it says that the candidate and multiple students, 2 or more, must be seen and heard engaging in synchronous instruction in these video clips. So I'll let you think about this in the chat. If you want to think about what are some of the benefits and potential challenges of this requirement across the different classrooms or non-classroom placements for these candidates. So again, we do know sometimes some of these special education classrooms can look a little different from the general education classrooms. As we think about what these video clips need to show, if you could think of some of the benefits, how these is going to help our teachers and candidates, and potentially some of the challenges. I'll let you put those in the chat. Okay, we'll let you keep thinking, but I think we could jump to the next slide and feel free to add some of those thoughts as we go. I did want to give everyone a little bit of a sneak preview of what we are looking at in the field test right now for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, what these video learning segments are expected to show. So we could start thinking about how our candidates might be able to capture this in their classrooms. And again, some of the considerations they might need to think about to fully get this on film. So we see in cycle 1, you see the 3 video clips they need to submit. Creating a positive and safe learning environment, connecting to prior learning, and establishing expectations for content-specific learning. We see age and or developmentally appropriate student activities and instructional strategies, and next steps for content-specific learning. We see in cycle 2, I won't read you all 4 of them, but I'll let you take a look there with the reminder that candidates need to include a video clip with these focuses. And I want you to think about video, right? And think about our extensive support needs students with something like the student self-assessment. That might include, a self-assessment that would need hand over hand, or AAC devices that if you have a wide camera lens, will be difficult to see. I mean, we might see it out of the corner of our eye. We're going to talk in a second how annotations can kind of help train our eye on what to look for. But if you had someone who knew the lesson plan, who knew the students, who know that during this part of the lesson, it would be really great to have the camera trained on specific students or specific actions, it would really make it easier for the candidates and the assessors to see how it went during the lesson. So here are our annotation titles. So again, thinking about how we can both demonstrate and explain these in the special education classrooms or the general education classrooms with our special education students. Some of these things, again, I'm not going to read all of them. You can see them there. But when we think of age or developmentally appropriate higher order thinking, that might require a rationale because, you know, that might be student specific as to why it is developmentally appropriate. So having that annotation and that chance for the candidate to really explain what is going on there, and having, again, the camera work focused enough to where we can see why and how it might be developmentally appropriate would really be a benefit. So again, we also see for cycle 2, and remembering that each of these annotation titles must be used across the 3 video clips. Again, I won't read them for you, but things like students using educational technology, if those assistive technology or educational technology devices are really student specific, you're going to want to hopefully see exactly what those students are doing. And so the candidates can really reflect on how the students were able to utilize those devices to access you know, the goals of the lesson. So going back to these annotations, right? The old adage really isn't true here, where a picture is not worth 1,000 words. We really want those 1,000 characters, and we need them. Candidates really need to utilize all of the characters available to them to explain the action happening in their videos. And I want to, you know, we've been in marker scoring, and one of the things I'm going to say is that there is so much activity in these classrooms. Sometimes the paraeducator running the center across the room is bleeding into the audio of these recordings. It might be tough to parse out exactly what's going on and happening in what the teacher is wanting to show. So that's where the annotation can really train, again, the candidate when they review this, the assessors when they review this, to the action that the teacher is wanting to highlight, you know, in their lesson as they reflect on, you know, how the lesson went. These annotations can really flesh out what we might not be able to see, because even with 10 cameramen in modern classrooms, if you had these different camera people trained on every student, you know, it's a multi-camera shoot, we know we wouldn't be able to get everything. So these annotations are so critical to go into the rationale and the nuances of what's going on in the classroom, and how and why the teacher proceeds with the lesson the way they do. So there are lots of technologies out there. We know all of these platforms are different, but similar. So we can kind of use some of these strategies of having a video plan going in across the board. And it doesn't matter what you're using to record, whether it's, you know, a professional video camera, a laptop, a cell phone. If the more you can involve others into the actual recording of the lesson, front load them on what you are hoping and trying to capture, I do really think the best product, it will yield a much better product for the candidate. And as Melissa and Keith talked about, then there's still lots of steps beyond that, how you view it, how you analyze it after the fact. But the plan going in, I think, can make a big difference afterwards. So with that, I just, again, wanted to give folks a chance to comment in the chat. After looking at these video learning segments and annotation titles, how might these look different on videos across the many different classrooms or non-classroom placements with students with different support needs? We know this is not a cookie cutter thing, and these videos can very much look different amongst different candidates and the schools they're teaching in. If you wanted to talk through some of those points, please put them in the chat. So I do see a question on something like Zoom and how to, let's see, advice to get and share video from something like Zoom. So there are some ways to download videos from Zoom, obviously to get them into compatible formatting for submission to whether it's the candidates programs or for the TPA. So anyone else have information on that? Melissa or Keith?
I actually think we have other ES folks here too who might be able to answer that. I wouldn't want to give incorrect information, but I will say a camera is just working. A camera on a phone is just working well, but certainly people have been using Zoom as well. But I think ES would be better to answer that. So that's for Corey, right?
Yeah, I used a phone camera for 3 of the meetings that I had to host, but one of them I had to do through a Zoom, and that was a really good meeting for me. And I just being able to get the proper formatting has been the hard part for me. It hasn't been able. It's not that I don't understand what to do or how to do it. It's to get the right format so that when I submit it, I make sure that everything is correct.
Corey, is this for the Cal APA? Is that what you're speaking of?
I'm cycle 2 in the class that I'm in right now. So for Pearson cycle 2, being able to
TPA or APA?
APA.
Okay, all right. So yeah, when you said meeting, that's what I was thinking. So does the recording include you and the requisite number of people who are engaged in your
Yeah. We had to do, I don't know, 4 or 5 videos, different meetings for that. And I have all of them, but one of the meetings that we had to do was via Zoom because we met on a like a site work day, and not everybody was on site, but they were able to get to Zoom. And so I don't know how to get my Zoom onto a place that I can format it in order to.
You need to get it into I would say MP4. You need it whether it's on your device, whether you record it on your device or the cloud, it doesn't matter. You need to get it into an MP4 so then it can be manipulated. And when I say manipulated, I don't mean edited.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And make the cuts. No edits.
Now can I video the Zoom with my camera? Can I go back and video that camera or Zoom session with my camera and then edit it from my phone, or do I have to?
Easier. I think it's easier than that. I don't think that's the way to go. I think you find that recording.
Yep.
And you get depends on if you're Mac or PC.
Right.
You get the converting. I'm going to say an app. And then you resave it and name it, and then you work within that MP4 platform. But I do this a lot, but I have to say I'm not a super technical expert, but that's the version. You don't have to get it into the MP4.
Okay.
You'll be able to make your cuts to get the segments that you want.
Okay.
Melissa, there's a lot of suggestions coming into the chat as well.
Yeah, okay, Corey, open the chat. Sounds like
I see it. And then my last suggestion, this is just a suggestion, is like because I've been through cycle 1, 3, and now 2 to finish. And the hardest part for me for 3 and 2 was the formatting of videos and the technological stuff. It wasn't the class stuff. It was the video technological aspect of the class. And that's where I spend most of my time. And I just, it's, so I don't want to, by just making a suggestion. I appreciate your time. That's kind of why I was here today. See if I could find some help with the formatting. So I really do appreciate it.
If I can add just a little bit on this in relationship, particularly to the Cal TPA for SPED, and for, general ed, if any of you are working in that area. Corey's right, the technology part of it can be overwhelming, but as we've kind of hinted throughout the entire session, we're really encouraging you not to wait until you're working on the Cal TPA to actually start using videoing. Videoing, the earlier you can use videoing as a means of professional development, the more comfortable the candidate becomes. And I really want to encourage this because it is a high stakes test. And if you think about all of the stress that Corey was articulating, adding that onto, a candidate trying to earn their credential, trying to, meet university requirements, it can be overwhelming. So the more we can begin to nurture this metacognitive reflection using video from the earliest dates possible, not only are we shaping the minds, but we're reducing that stress.